Hey everybody, Matt Johnston here, and this is another in our series of videos dealing with commercial leases. Today we're going to be talking about improvements, fixtures, and trade fixtures. So I first want to stop and ask everybody to be sure you click the subscribe button. It's usually right up here. Or you can also do down below in the comment section, and be sure you click the little bell so that you get a notice when we post up new videos. So today's subject is what happens in a leased space, a commercial lease space, and there are improvements or fixtures installed, and what is the difference between a fixture and a trade fixture, and they are different. So an improvement generally is anything that's added to the leased property that increases the value of the property. So an example might be if you install something like trees or plantings out front, or you upgrade the electrical equipment or the plumbing equipment, and these upgrades add value to the property. Most of the time you will see a description of the premises in a commercial lease will say something of the leased premises and all improvements thereupon, or all improvements thereto. Improvements, almost without exception, convey back to the landlord at the end of the lease. So even if the tenant pays for the improvement, it goes back with the landlord at the end of the lease. So be mindful of that. If you need to have an upgrade in your HVAC system, it might be something that you can have the landlord take care of. That way you aren't the one footing the bill for something that you won't get to take with you. Sometimes for improvements you can work with the landlord and get a reduction in rent, particularly if the landlord is asking the tenant to pay for the improvement. Okay, so next up is a fixture. A fixture is something that is usually attached to the premises, either the walls, the floors, the ceiling, and it is somewhat permanent. Even if it looks like you might be able to take it with you, it may still be a fixture that conveys back to the landlord at the end of the lease. So there is an acronym that is used in the real estate world that can help you determine if something is a fixture or not. And the acronym is MARIA. So what do we do about MARIA? So the first is method of attachment. That's what the M stands for. If it is permanently fixed to the structure, so using glue, nails, bolts, pipes, screws, whatever, even if it is relatively easy to remove, it becomes a fixture. So one way of thinking about it, if you install cabinets, those are not difficult to remove. Usually is remove a few bolts, remove a few screws, and off you go. But because it is fixed to the wall, it usually conveys back with the premises. Next up is adaptability. That's what the first A stands for in MARIA. The item becomes an integral part of the lease premises when it can't be easily removed without changing the nature of the premises. So, for example, a floating laminate floor isn't technically attached to the floor. It floats usually on a padding or something of those lines, but it becomes a fixture because it's not easily removed. Similarly, if you are a restaurant and you install a fancy Sub-Zero refrigerator into the space, because the space where the Sub-Zero fridge goes is of a fixed space, it's specified, chances are that's going to be considered a fixture that translates back to the landlord at the end of the lease. The R is for relationship of the parties. So this is more about what happens if there's a dispute. A tenant is more likely to win if the dispute is between a tenant and a landlord. If it's a buyer of a space, the buyer is more likely to win if there's a dispute. So calling something a fixture by the landlord may not necessarily result in it conveying. A tenant can make a claim. So if, going back to our refrigerator example, let's say you install a fairly standard household refrigerator. There's no extra cabinetry that's put around, it's just literally against a wall, and it plugs in, chances are you're going to be able to take it. Same with lighting. Lighting may become a fixture if it is wired into the ceiling, but a lamp that plugs into the wall, that's a piece of furniture and not a fixture. Next up is intention. What was the intention of the party when the item was attached to the leased premises? It's a fixture if the intent was to make it a permanent attachment. For example, you put a built-in bookcase in an office space. That's pretty permanent, and the intent was to make it permanent, even if the tenant did it. So it becomes a fixture that then conveys with the leased property. And finally, the second A is, was there an agreement between the parties? For example, oftentimes in commercial leases, there is a build-out provision that requires the landlord and the tenant to work together to make the space suitable for a tenant to move into the space. If there's an agreement between the parties about putting in shelving, putting in cabinetry, putting in new flooring, those are generally going to be considered fixtures, even though it is something that may be temporarily installed because the parties agreed that this is the work that we're going to do. So MARIA is a very helpful acronym to help you figure out whether or not you're dealing with an improvement or you're dealing with a fixture, and whether or not that fixture then conveys with the property. So I want to say a quick word about trade fixtures. Trade fixtures are those things that allow a tenant to carry on their business or their trade. So those things, even though they are fixtures, meaning they might be installed or attached to the walls, those things often go with the tenant at the end of it. One of the things that I think is helpful is maybe an air compressor. Let's say you work in an automotive repair shop or you're leasing an automotive repair shop and you install an air compressor. And oftentimes they need to be attached to the walls or the floors to make them stable, but that air compressor is necessary for the mechanic to carry on their trade or their business. So at the end of the lease, unless there is an agreement between the parties and there's some sort of MARIA analysis, generally that would be considered a trade fixture, and the air compressor then leaves with the mechanic at the end of the lease term. So a trade fixture almost always leaves with the tenant because it is business specific. And the more specific to your business, the better off you're going to be. Now, where things get a little bit dicey is the kinds of businesses, oftentimes restaurant equipment like ovens and grills and things like that, they convey with the space. But hopefully you get the idea that the more specialized the equipment that is installed by the tenant, the more likely that's going to be deemed a trade fixture and it goes with the tenant at the end of the lease. So to sum up, a trade fixture almost always belongs to the tenant. A fixture and improvements to the leased property almost always belong to the landlord at the end of the lease and conveys back to the landlord with the leased premises. So bear those things in mind, and when you are dealing with your commercial lease and you're looking at what's going on, this is one of the things you want to be very careful that you understand how improvements and fixtures convey with the property. In the meantime, again, please subscribe and go check out our blog at mattthelawyer.com. You can also start to see some of our other videos in the playlist dealing with commercial leases. In the meantime, everybody have a good day, and I will speak to you later. Bye-bye.